Okay. All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual forum, IL Lesson Plans, Weapons of Mass Instruction. Yes, that is a borrowed title. On behalf of the ILC of AMICAL, my name is Christine Furno from American University of Sharjah. I'm joined by my fellow librarians, Livia Piotto and Manlio Perugini from John Cabot University in Rome. And today we want to discuss with you some lesson plans that we've been working with in our context. Let me take care of just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We're going to have today's webinar recorded. We're recording now, and that will be shared with everyone soon after. And today's presentation is part of AMICAL's online events, a member-led initiative to provide webinars and other online events on topics of interest to AMICAL peers. More details are available on the website and on AMICAL Connect. I will also mention we do have a short, well, I'll just mention the outline that we're going to do to get us started. The beginning of the presentation or the forum is theory light. We're going to talk a little bit about theory. And then we'll move over to the experiences and examples from John Cabot and as well as American University of Sharjah. And then we'll discuss the challenges. And then we're going to open it up to you, the audience, to share your experiences or ask any questions. For the questions, you can either speak through the microphone and say hello to us, or if you want to use the chat box, I'll try to keep my eye out on that as well. So hopefully we're in good shape to get this going. Guys, anything else before? Did I miss any anything you can think of before we need to get started?
No, I think it's all set.
We're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so she's going to be sharing the slides with you. We have a handful of slides to discuss some points, and then we'll just talk back and forth with this. So we'll take about the first 20-25 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to our participants. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen and open the presentation. Okay, first of all, I would like to just give a brief disclaimer. We're not doing this because we're super experts on lesson plans. We just want to follow up an input that came after the past AMICAL conference. So the idea behind this virtual forum is that we would love to review the work of lesson planning. And we want to see if there is any one of us who's doing massive lesson planning, why we do it, and possibly share what we're doing. So that's basically what we want to cover with this session. So I want to start with our many hats. So as information literacy librarians, instructional librarians, we do have many roles. And I love this little graphic because it explains pretty much everything. So all our roles. And the lesson plan aspect belongs mostly to two roles in this visual aid. So the first one is instructional designer. So as instructional designers, if we become instructional designer, our main goal is to design purposefully and strategic learning experiences. So what we want to do, we want to create something that we can share with the students in class. And I don't want to spend too much time on the theory behind instructional design, also because I'm not an instructional designer by profession. I'm just, well, partially an instructional designer while I'm using that hat. But I just want to remind everyone else that instructional design can be based on a variety of models, and we can include understanding by design. So that is the model that informs the framework that all of us know. There's also another model that we might know, that some of you might know a little bit better. It's Charboot's user model that includes reflection as well. So that's another important thing to remember. And another model that has been developed in the years is the teaching tripod approach by John Kaplowitz. So these are all models that us as library instructors we can use for instructional design. Instructional design is also, has also lots to do with learning theories. Again, I'm not an expert on learning theories, but when we're planning our instruction sessions, we should take into consideration theories such as behaviorism, cognitivism, and Ivana is a big fan of that, but also constructivism. So there are several learning theories that enter this story. And also, as instructional designers, we have to use evaluation assessment models. In particular, I like the Kirkpatrick model, and I've been talking about the Kirkpatrick model for the past 2 conferences. It includes 4 different levels: reaction, learning, behavior, and results. So this presentation does not really go into that in the specific, but I'll be happy to talk about these on AMICAL Connect, for example. So we can definitely get back to that. So enough with instructional designer. The other important role that we want to discuss is the teacher. So as teachers, we are, as Alison King in her 1993 article said, we become from sage on the stage to guide on the side. So we want to bring some expertise, but we're not just lecturing the students. So we want to combine content, so we explain content, and we want also the students to do active learning activities in class. So we want to create a better learning experience that includes those 2 aspects. As teachers, we can improvise. I'm a big fan of improvisation because I have to do that a lot. But I think that it's not helpful, especially when you want to follow a script. So when you need to organize your thoughts. So we can use instructional design to become better teachers. So this is how these 2 roles somehow combine. But the thing is, how do we transfer instructional design to the classroom? We can use a method that is emphasized by most instructional design models, which is backward design. Backward design says that basically we start from articulating learning outcomes. Then we decide what type of assessment evidence we want to measure based on the learning outcomes that we created. And finally, we create a learning plan that includes content and activities. So backward design is what we use to create lesson plans. Now, I'm not saying that this is exactly what we should do every time that we're creating lesson plans, but it's definitely a helpful way to start thinking about a lesson plan. I will share the presentation later on AMICAL Connect. There's also a link here that you can use to take a look at the Understanding Backward Design lesson plan template. It comes from the Understanding Backward Design website. And finally, we can say that the lesson plan is what we use to merge the 2 roles. So instructional designer creates lesson plans, and the teacher uses lesson plans to bring the theories in the classroom. The problem is that when you're combining these 2 words, so the ideal world of the instructional designer and the real life world of the teacher, mess can happen. So we have to be prepared. Okay, now, these are components of an effective lesson plan. Where did I get these components from? I'm kind of a nerd, and I love reading books that include sample lesson plans that I can use and reuse for inspiration. I'm not the most creative person when it comes to design, learning activities, and instructional settings. So I need some inspiration. So I read those books. I see what others have been doing. And then I recreate, modify things according to what I need. And I also use a lot Project Cora and the Framework Sandbox. Those 2 websites have great sample lesson plans that you can take a look at, reuse to get ideas. So these components are not mandatory. You don't have to consider these as something that you have to necessarily have on your lesson plan. But I would say that you should think about including at least the learning outcomes, the activities that you want to do with your students, and the assessment method. I think that before working with the learning outcomes, we have to think about the big ideas that are behind why we're doing a library session. So the big ideas are basically the frames that we want to include in the lesson plan. So why do we want to waste time? Because we have so many things to do at work, and teaching requires a lot of time. Then we do other activities. We probably work a lot with students. Some of us do reference services. So we have lots of things to do. So why do we want to waste time preparing a lesson plan? I think that we do have a reason to work with lesson plans because well, you can create your lesson plan as you prefer, but you can have a script, especially if you're new to the profession. So you may have everything written down. You can follow and organize your thoughts. So you know what's supposedly going to happen during the session. Then if we spend time writing and designing a lesson plan, it means that we can reuse it in the future if we're giving the same session again, and we don't have to spend the time again. So more time now means definitely less time in the future. And what I think it's really important, we can share the lesson plans. So basically it's what I've been doing with all the examples that I've been reading. So I use something that other people have shared. And if I do the same, I can share my lesson plan with my colleagues, with other librarians, and ideally with faculty members. In the past, I had the chance to share one of my lesson plans with the faculty member because I was sick and I couldn't attend the class. So the faculty took over with my lesson plan. So it's a good way to keep all the contents there. Things might be changed, but sharing is a good way to work. And now let's talk about an example. So the John Cabot example that we want to discuss today. So I call this slide "I Design, You Teach" because it happened recently that I had to prepare a class for a new professor. So it was a completely new topic, new professor, and I had to spend some time working on what I wanted the students to do in class. So I prepared the lesson plan, and this is the result. So you can see hopefully my lesson plan. Okay, so I have the frames. I decided what frames I wanted to use. I decided the learning outcomes. Then I knew that the class would have been 75 minutes long, and I decided the structure of my session, basically. So the plan, the estimated time, and the assessment method. The problem was that I overscheduled myself. So I didn't realize that I had scheduled that session, that new session with a new professor that I want to make a good impression on, at the same time when I was supposed to be with another professor. So what could I have done? I prepared everything, so everything was ready, and I decided to ask Manlio, so that's the reason why we have Manlio here, to take over the class. So I said, okay, that's what we have. I have an instruction plan. We have a class. You go and deliver the session. So Manlio now can probably tell us what happened in that session. Maybe.
Hello, can you all hear me? Because I'm receiving continuously the message, your internet connection is unstable. I'm so glad about it. So let me walk you through briefly, because I don't want to make it really boring, the what really happened in class. I mean, the moment in which everything that Livia just so clearly described was translated into actual class time. So first of all, as you can see, the lesson plan is quite detailed, which was, allow me the term, a blessing for me, because I had to deliver the session I didn't design, and therefore, the more information I had, the better. So basically, as Livia told, there are frames and learning outcomes, which stems directly from the way the lesson plan was designed. Now, actual class time. The schedule was quite thorough, but at the same time, quite tight, because, yeah, as Livia said, she wanted to make a good impression on the professor, and of course, I jumped in on that, because it was a new professor, and I wanted to make a good impression as well. So I tried to follow it as, let's say, as thoroughly as I can. And as you can see, the timing is quite precise. There's the introduction part, where the learning outcomes, meaning the class objectives, were actually projected on the screen of the class. So they were available to the students as I was speaking, because we're talking about a 300 level class, quite advanced. So Livia felt, and I agreed, that this was something that the students were actually supposed to know and to interact with. And the class objectives kind of helped me steer through the actual class time. And apparently the professor was quite impressed. I mean, she looked at the class objectives and, well, she nodded in a, let's say, in a positive way. Because the point is, all these objectives, as you can see, since Livia is sharing, basically told the students not so much what they were supposed to do, but what they would end up learning and, well, getting familiar with. So it was basically, okay, this is what you're going to get home with at the end of the session. And as you can see, it's quite impressive. Because, yeah, it's declined in terms of activities, but it becomes something that you will be able to do in the future. Then, after the introduction, well, the guided practice part. So students were divided in pairs and assigned articles from a general source containing brief articles on topics related to the overall aim of the class. So, yeah, the Iranian Revolution turns 40. So questions and issues related to, well, 40 years after the Iranian Revolution. And this is where things started, let's say, a bit changing, because as I was showing the articles and assigning them, the professor kind of jumped in a positive way, adding further information about those issues. I'm talking about content, so she went more in depth into the issue. Of course, we had taken into account the possibility of this time being in a way rearranged. That is why it actually, this enriched the overall practice. Then we went through, and of course, while we were going through, there was a student who arrived like 20 minutes late. So while the other students were reading their articles, I had to briefly sum up what we've done up to that moment. And I had to, well, sum up to the students, whereas the professor at the same time was basically talking into my ear and telling me, oh, this is a student that doesn't want to do anything, she just arrived late, and blah, blah, blah. So that was something I had to kind of balance within. Okay, and then still in the guided practice, there was this discussion moment where the students reported about the articles, and as they were reporting, I kind of recorded on the board keywords and interesting questions that came out. And this was another moment where the professor jumped in, going in details into those issues and to the keywords sometimes, even if just suggesting, I don't know, some other ways to phrase the same issues. Okay. Then we went through the following phase, which is the direct instruction phase. So we moved from the, let's say, the content-related materials, like the articles related to the topics of the class, to the library resources. And so that was the moment in which all the elements came together. Because this was also an assessment moment. I asked the student if they were familiar with what I was describing. Sorry. Thanks. And I'm in a shared office, as you might have noticed. And so where was I? Okay, oh yeah, the direct instruction. Okay. Most of the students were already familiar with the library resources, which is one thing that, again, readjusted what happened, because I didn't have to go that much in details into how those resources worked. And, well, it basically saved me time. Okay, and the final part, the independent practice part, was actually the one where we had to cut, because they started doing the research to find sources. But when we get to the part in which they had to write the outline of the paper, and the collecting sources, and me collecting all the sources, basically we ran out of time. Also because, talk about last minute changes, the professor told me that another professor was supposed to come at the end of the class and talk to the students about an event which was related to the topic of the class. Funny thing is, that professor, the second one, ended up not showing. Nonetheless, this event cut some time, so we didn't get to the final part in which I collected the sources, and they could probably write they get to write the outline of the paper, but it was a really brief outline, which was collected by the professor. So yeah, I barely had the time to close and wrap up. As you can see from the lesson plan, there's the closing part, which is basically, well, 99% of the classes, a moment in which we sum up all the services that are available to students in terms of reference help and everything that can stem out from the instruction session. And that was basically the gist of it. So as you can see, in a way, I managed to follow step by step, but then I had to, well, drop it into the actual reality. And that's it.
Thank you. I actually have questions for you guys. Do you want to, should we do it now or should we wait? I can do my segment and then we can come back, or I can ask now. Do you want to?
Maybe later.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes better flow. Thank you guys. That was very interesting. And again, I have a couple questions that have already popped up. So, so my segment, I wanted to talk about a particular element that we've incorporated into lesson plans, looking at self-critical reflection. And that's something that we've been working with for several semesters. I have, I'll have you go to the next slide, Livia, if you don't mind. It might be a bit difficult to see, but this is a tail end of a class activity where reflection was just initially added to our planning or our activity of the class. So not necessarily the planning, but the actual activity itself. And so this is an English 204 200 level class. This is their big research paper, first time that they're writing kind of multi-sources. And we have our last bit here, this reflection, looking at, you know, they found a couple articles, they're able to identify the title of the article, the title of the journal, etc. And now we're looking at what those next steps might be. So this is part E of this activity. We rarely get time. I would love to have a 75-minute class. We do sort of, but in general, we have 50-minute sessions, and this part's very rushed. So I do kind of threaten to collect from some sections, depending on how I feel the tempo of the classes are going. If they need a little more assistance, just based on my working with them, I will have them turn this section in. They struggle with this part. They're not quite sure how to handle it. Even with these kind of guided questions, they're not really really understanding what I'm trying to get at. So I let them say, be very open. Do you need statistics? Do you need history? Do you need key dates, key names? Do you need theory? They struggle with how we want to work with this. But what I like about this is that it gets them thinking. So as they're walking out the door, maybe they don't forget about the class right away. Hopefully they're thinking about, okay, I have to do a few more things that will keep me motivated. When I'm seeing this class, it's usually week 2, 3, 4, and some of them do not have topics. So it just depends on how they want to kind of navigate the rest of the resources with this. Prior to this class, they do kind of our little flipped classroom examples that they come with what we call a research log. And so they have done some preliminary searching. We just only get to see them this one time. Okay, so next slide, please. So based on that little kind of introduction of reflection into a class activity, we've been working, and this is really all of Rhonda's work. My colleague Rhonda Stricklet, she teamed up with a faculty member, Maya Agassi, and came to the Paris workshop. And some of this has come out of that work. So again, this is all Rhonda's work. I'm just kind of presenting on it. It's something that we've done recently. So the AUS Information Literacy Program, we now have this kind of critical self-reflection initiatives that we want to address. And we're working on formative assessment, using the reflection as an assessment tool, looking at working draft reflections, and then also at the end of the semester with this same group, an essay prompt. So the left side of the screen, the formative assessment, they do that mid-semester. And there's a lot of questions that they need to answer. The questions were devised by Rhonda and Maya in Paris and then kind of tweaked out when they got back. And then the right side of the screen is the summative essay prompt, which is something much shorter. So I was just going to kind of review some of those slides. We've just recently presented on this a few weeks ago, so I'm kind of cribbing from there as well. If you could go to the next slide for me. Looking at this reflective piece of how they got started, Rhonda and Maya took what they were working on and looked at what they wanted to assess from the current syllabus. Now, this syllabus is a common syllabus shared amongst like 25 sections. There's not a lot of rearranging that they can do, but they can address a few things and then make it work for their course. In step 2, they created the reflective questions. In step 3, they connected those reflected questions to the framework. And then in step 4, applied the framework to student responses. So that was kind of the flow of the work that they did. And it's been very helpful for me, because I wasn't a part of that situation, to understand how they made this kind of work and go through. Next slide, please. Now, we have, if you go ahead and, yep, thank you. I have a little animation there. This is a summary slide that Rhonda created. It's observations of the formative assessment from the working draft reflection. Again, that is a reflective piece that's done midway through this semester with one of these 25 sections. So this Maya Agassi faculty, she's teaching, I think, 1 to 2 sections. So she and Rhonda created these questions. What we have highlighted here is one example of a multi-page reflection. So they really dug deep, but this is one example. How did you have to vary your keywords to expand the scope of your research? How did your keywords change from the beginning of the research process? What prompted the changes? Where did you learn about them? What did you learn about them? So as you go down, we can see that the frame is addressed, searching a strategic exploration. And then Rhonda just pulled out some of these kind of highlighted areas that we were able to kind of bullet list. And of course that goes into reporting, right? So we can also report. We now have some qualitative data that we can feed into our workflow. Next slide, please. This is one more, I know it's a lot of text, but just to briefly kind of summarize again the work that she's done is taking the frame and then going from what the students said, their responses, their feedback, and then tying them into the framework as far as the knowledge practices and the disposition. So on that right side, she's kind of tied into a student said this and it goes into this knowledge practice. A student said this and it goes into the dispositions. So I like the last one. It's saying, in the beginning I was lost as I was unable to find what I was looking for. Later, I used the techniques taught in the library session to look at many articles. I found many interesting articles and facts I was unaware of and applied it to my research. So, you know, any of those kind of positive remarks, of course, strike a chord with us. In a few minutes, in a moment, I'll show you kind of the counter of that. All right, next slide, please. The end of semester reflection. And sorry, we're on a tangent now from the lesson planning, but I thought that this was nice to kind of show you how this rolls out in the work that we're doing. Students across, I think there were, out of those 25 sections, there were, I think, at least 12 sections last semester that volunteered to do this bit here. So students in those sections were asked the following questions. At the top left, you can see, what did you find difficult about the research task? In the bottom left, what were the most challenging aspects of the project? And the top right, what problems did you encounter? And other right side, the bottom, what solutions did you employ to overcome these problems? And then the last one, this is something we actually show to the next semester students. If there's any advice that a 204 student would give for your next semester, we actually show them what was said from the previous semester. Okay, next slide. If you look at the first, I have a couple little animations. I couldn't find exactly the information I was looking for, the aspect I wanted. Next one, please. As the research question was developed in a manner where the answer was not easily available and it could not be answered with a yes or no, finding information in statistics was difficult. And this last one, finding a topic which interests me as well as has the required number of sources. No straightforward solution, spending hours a day just on research, which is a waste of time, as I will be working as a civil engineer, not a specialist or a researcher. Advice, just buy the essay. So to me, I just appreciated that candor, and I know these students are very busy with what they're working on, and so I can imagine if they have the mindset of not having to do research in the way that we're asking them to do so, it probably does seem like a giant waste of time. However, we do see the civil engineers in a following semester, and I believe you start to see that they see the value in understanding the lingo that's being used in the scholarly research and how you tie all that together. So anyway, I just get a kick out of this statement. I use it all the time just to kind of let the librarians know that, you know, this is what we're dealing with, and faculty. I think faculty need to know this information as well, this reflective bit. All right, shall we go to the next one? We are now going to spend some time talking about the challenges, and I'm guessing this will generate some discussion. So if you want to jump into the conversation, we'll have that available here in just a moment. All right. Okay, the challenges. Manlio, do you want to jump in, or?
Well, I might jump in since I was, let's say, the end user or final user, as you prefer, or the front end as well. So in my personal experiences, the challenges are related, well, first of all, to sharing. I mean, here at JCU, I am lucky because me, Liv, and Eleonora are quite used to share lesson plans. So we kind of devised a common language, which is something that I realized in preparing for this forum. I kind of took for granted, even though one should not do, because it does not come automatically. So, well, this is the first and possibly the most radical challenge. The sharing, finding a way in which to share efficiently. The second is the rehearsal. I mean, okay, I had a fantastic lesson plan, and I'm not saying that just because Lydia's here, but because it actually worked. I mean, the session went through. The professor was satisfied. I, for once, was satisfied. So, cool. But you need to take your time to rehearse. And yeah, time is the most sensitive resource because it's something we do not have. Of course, well, the more you rehearse, the better you perform, and the less you will have to rehearse once you're going to deliver, once again, that session. So together with that comes the preparation time, which involves rehearsing, but not only that. I mean, the actual, I'm not saying, I don't want to say redesign, but yeah, you kind of have to adapt the lesson plan to your style, let's say, and at the same time adapt your style to the lesson plan. And well, that's the point. Time again.
Yep.
Theoretical time and actual time. Because yeah, we try to schedule, as Livia said, to overschedule everything, which is a way in which you can at least try to have control on what's happening, being aware of the fact that it's an ideal result, but which would never be exactly like that. And well, let's say the most significant coefficient in the equation between lesson plan time and real life time are the last minute changes. Again, as I mentioned, I had all sorts of last minute changes. The last but not least, the final one, which actually wasn't as planned. I mean, I had a last minute change on a last minute change, which again, it took time, which could have been spent differently. But I mean, on the other hand, it's kind of taking into account buffer time. So you know that this is something that is supposed to happen. I'm not jumping on the multiple sections because I personally have I don't have that kind of experience. So I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Yes, so we have, in my experience, numerous sections. I've mentioned that a couple times. And, you know, one of the issues is, well, you know, and you can turn it into an advantage as well, is that you're saying the same thing over numerous times for weeks on end to different students. You know, we're only seeing them one time. We also have the opportunity, going back to the rehearsal, it becomes a rehearsal every time you say it to these 25 plus sections. So I feel like it does, you know, there's a learning curve with what you're going to do. You know, some of my one-off sections that I'll just teach once that semester, you know, if it's a complete disaster, then I don't have a lot of recovery time or, you know, recuperation. I can't get back into it. I can't do it again for quite some time. Whereas the ones that we're doing these one-shots with numerous sections, at least you get your rhythm, your tempo, your choreography of the class kind of under your belt. And so after the first or second time, maybe 3 or 4 times, depending, you can, it comes off a lot better, a little bit more polished.
And if I may add, the teaching multiple sections was actually the reason why here at John Cabot we started sharing lesson plans, because we don't have the 27 sections that you have, but even having 2-3 sections of the same course where you have to repeat exactly the same thing, and maybe a different person has to do that. That is one of the reasons why we wanted to have something that was easily shared. It doesn't work all the time because, as Manlio was saying, my teaching style, so what I put into my design might not be exactly someone else's teaching style. So it might be a problem in some cases. So sharing is definitely a good thing, but it could be one of the most difficult part to reach, basically.
Yes. Yep. I agree. I wanted to mention a couple things on the chat. Let's see, before we go into questions, or since I have you guys, I'm going to take, I'm going to ask a couple questions actually, and then I'll get back to the chats. So I was curious how much input do you get from your faculty, which has come up in the chat as well. Do you find that you've kind of sent over the lesson plan and they'll say, no, 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 I don't want you to do that, or please make sure you do this? Do you get any kind of feedback from them as you're going through this?
Well, initially I met with the professor and we started thinking about how we could have developed the session together. And she was the one deciding to have the students reading the same, well, different articles from the same website. So it was actually faculty-led. It was not my decision, my entire decision. I decided to use certain activities, maybe not the perfect ones. I probably overestimated the time that I needed for all those activities. It's true that it was the first time that I was doing such a session in that way. So I think that I got lots of input from the professor. I probably didn't manage that input well. So that's especially because, well, I don't know how I would have done in the class. I was not present. So from what Manlio said, that was a little bit too much. So I should have probably got rid of something just to ensure that everything would have been smoother, I guess.
Okay, thank you. How realistic is it with your class objectives? You know, the class objectives that you have on the lesson plan, the 5 to 6 resources, are they pretty efficient in getting those, or do they struggle? Or does it just depend?
Okay, that was something that I decided. I don't know if it was realistic or not because Manlio was in class. You have to start with a number. Yeah, I think in some cases students might be very fast. In some other cases, they might be super slow, even to understand what you're asking them to do. So I think it's trial and error. So you try, and then if there's something that it's not working properly, you tweak it for the following time. So that's my my perspective. I don't know if Manlio.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree, because apart from the fact that there may be in the same class huge differences, not only in terms of skills, but also in terms of approach, because sometimes students might be slower, but more efficient. Some other times they might be able to find 6 sources in 5 minutes, but they won't be able to know what to do with those sources. I mean, they know, okay, yeah, it's related to my topic. Yeah, this is how they say, I found a bunch of sources on this, but they might not be aware of what they're supposed to do with those sources. So yeah, it's definitely trial and errors and collecting evidence to tweak, as Livia put it, and improve step by step.
Thank you. Okay, I've been asking all the questions. I think it's time for others, or if you have examples of lesson plans, is anyone interested in joining us to share that?
Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share so that we can see people. Yep. There.
All right. Who did
on back?
Sure. Yeah, okay. We want to see you.
Okay. I just wanted to agree with what all of you in a way mentioned. I mean, I had so many situations where you kind of assume that this is just enough and a good pace for one session, but students kind of prove you wrongly, and that something needs to be cut out, or, for example, even explained further, even in the language that is used. You mentioned something, Chris, about forms and maybe how they didn't really get what I wanted to say. I definitely had that, and I'm happy that I did anticipate that I need to ask them through, that was once upon a time when I did the muddiest point as an assessment. Like, it's very interesting. It was not even the content that they didn't understand, but actually some terms I have been using, or just the language that proved not to be as clean as it was in my mind. Yeah. So that was, for example, extremely helpful for the coming classes and generations. And yeah, those situations where something happens and you're unable to wrap stuff made me even, how to say, cut out a lot of the usual like presentation introductions. So frankly, I sometimes don't even bother telling students what are the learning outcomes. we have learning management systems, so we post there. If they want to read it, they read it. If they didn't read it, what to do? You know, we need those 10 minutes. So that actually our most important part, for example, the forms you had, or Manilo, what you're mentioning for, sorry if I'm not saying your name properly, that doesn't come in those last 5 minutes where basically you're trying to fight with them to finish what's actually kind of a peak of what we were dealing with. So in my experience, it made me realize that the main thing needs to come within the 30 minutes. And then if we are lucky, we'll have time for whatever extra comes after. And this is if you have like a 50 minutes class. So of course, like that 20 minutes window is sort of...
It's precious.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, who else would like to share with us?
I have a question for you guys. Especially, thank you very much for the good instruction and for the sharing. I really like the part with the reflective part right there, and it seemed like a very huge project actually. And I was wondering to what extent the librarian is getting right here responsibility also of grading, or what is his role? Because I can imagine that the faculty member, you see, there's always like that kind of situation where the librarian is asking actually students to hand in something, and then students do not hand anything. So that's many times my experience, because I do not grade them. So I was wondering what is right here, like in that project with Rhonda, how they deal with that, or what's the role of Rhonda, or like Maha, not Maha, but
Maya.
Maya, yeah.
Yeah, from what I understand, and I could be off a bit, I believe because it was an AMICAL workshop that it was born out of, that they piloted this. I don't believe they're able to continue it for this particular course because, again, it was a common syllabus and there's just not much room to change things. However, Maya has another class, and you guys may have chatted about this in Beirut, that I think she and Rhonda are going to work on. So that will give them a lot more control and exploration on how they want to do this. As far as gathering the reflection bits, I think Maya's just sent those over to Rhonda, and then we've just extracted what the library part is to us. And then that gets fed in. I think this semester we got fed into a report, or part of our assessment report. Grading, I'll just say from my end, for the grading part, I generally, you know, it's kind of silly, but if they're a fussy class, I might say you're turning this in. Like, because I need them to focus a little bit more. Sometimes they get a little impatient in doing this. And so I'll say, look, if you want some feedback, because our activities in class do not get graded, but if they want feedback, if they add their email address, I will provide feedback to them. And then, you know, either screenshot it back to them through their email address with constructive feedback. And I have a few takers on that. Not too many, but some are interested.
Okay.
We have a question from Jorge. Jorge, you can speak now.
Hi. I think it goes in the same. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
It was for Chris. And I think it goes along the same lines that Michael asked, but a little bit also about when do you find the time for the assessment? Do you do that after the class? Because we say you didn't find a lot of time right then. And when do you get back to them, and when do you report on these? Is this something you do regularly with all of your classes, or? And I'd like also to know how many students do you include in your sample? Yeah,
so I know that Rhonda has approached those faculty, and generally, depending on what type of assessment that we're looking at, so the one with Maya, that's just one section, right? And so they've sat down together and worked out what they want to report on. The other assessment that goes out to multiple sections, those are all volunteer responders. So it gets sent out to the entire department, and then out of 25 sections, you might have half. You might have a fourth. And so at the end of the semester, we'll pull out the comments that we're interested in and just create a little summary. So it's usually end of the semester. Other assessment features include a Blackboard quiz, the pre and the post. And then if we get feedback from faculty directly, then we also have that information as well. Did I cover everything?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So it's usually an end of the semester effort. Yeah.
What I noticed in my experience with all of this, if you don't make any of these assessments like mandatory portion of IL assignment or something, then it's definitely better if these are given during the class. I mean, to ensure as many responses as possible. I mean, we had a complete failure in the first year when we wanted it to be voluntarily, and like, you're kind of hoping that students now love you so much that they really want to be engaged. But the fact that they have so many things going on that the least thing they're thinking of is this additional volunteering part of the assignment. So for the reflective ones, we managed to ask our faculty that, let's say, you make it mandatory part of submitting your final paper or whatever it is, speech, project, la la la.
And how does that go? Sorry, just quickly, how does that go? They're okay with that, the faculty?
Well, I was happy so far to manage to persuade them to do that.
Good. Okay.
But you know my methods. And I mean,
that's the next virtual forum, your methods.
And the good thing is it's basically nothing that adds to their assessment. So that's the way how I frame it to faculty. Like, look, just add this and I'm dealing with it. Like, you don't have to touch that part. However, of course, I will provide some narrative for your course why we asked for it. But I mean, again, we are a really small institution. I don't know if that also reflects on whether you can do it or not. But because, for example, one time we tried to do the reflective things in the class, students just don't provide good reflection on self-assessment portion. So maybe they will assess what we did wrongly or not so well or well. But like, they will not take time to really think about their experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why, in a way, you need them to reflect a bit on their own about this. But also, I mean, you want the answers. So somehow it needs to be mandatory, I guess.
Yeah.
Chris, if I can jump again, since I think I still have the voice.
Yes,
I haven't been muted yet.
No, of course.
You do, but we also have Aziz that has a question, and he raised his hand.
Super short. Could you share with us your pre and post assessments?
Yes.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Okay, sure thing.
Livia, I was so short.
Thank you, lovely. Aziz, you can speak.
There he is.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for sharing, the lesson plans. I hope we can have access to them later. It's interesting. Quick question. Nobody, argue the importance of integrating detailed frame into lesson plan as assessment or learning outcomes. Last year we had an experience here at EUI, and then from seeing different examples of students, how they prepared some assignments related to lesson plans in which they integrated detailed frame. So it seems promising. My question is, from your experiences, what do you think? How would you see the perception of students when they are exposed to frames? Because in recent information literacy literature, I wouldn't venture to say most, but most say it's challenging. it has to be reviewed. But I want your opinion. I mean, from your experiences, how do you see students when they try to work with the frames, with the lesson plans? Thank you.
For us, it's a struggle. It's not an easy, it hasn't been an easy transition. And I don't know if that's more from the librarian, myself, trying to figure out how to best teach this. So that's why the students struggle or do not understand, or the like language was mentioned earlier, the framing of the questions. So I think I'm still on a learning curve with that as well. Michael, did you have a comment?
I have a comment on that, because I have to be honest, and well, at least I don't usually mention the frames to the students as framework. So as something that I use to assess or to prepare the lesson plans. So I try to integrate that language into my content, into the content that I deliver, without, I know that I don't know if it's correct or if it's not, but they're not aware that I'm using the framework when I'm talking to them, but I do. So I don't know if there is a right or wrong way to address this issue. I think it's easier sometimes to just talk about things that the students might easily understand, rather than trying to waste too much time describing what the frames are.
For me, my comment right here is I believe that to teach a framework takes time. If I'm teaching, most of my times I'm teaching one-shot sessions, so it's not going to be about the framework. It's about like very hands-on, to the spot. And then like teaching the framework like on a freshman level or like a graduate level, that's like something else, like decision to be made like in a department of the library. What do you want to teach on certain levels? And right here at AEP, we're not at that point. You see, like on the freshman level, we are teaching one frame. It's like the scholarship as conversation, but then like the other 5 frames are not there. So that's, and we have then maybe like 3 or 4 sessions on the freshman semester, like the seminar. So I think it's very difficult to teach like the framework if you only have like a one-shot session. So that's really to keep in mind.
I think you can focus activities on a specific frame, but again, why waste time on explaining what the framework is? We want the students to do practical activities. So I completely agree with Michael, and I prefer to have them do something practical rather than explaining all the technicalities that we have behind.
Yeah, I agree. And especially because, again, you're then framing them to think that this is the only thing they should be taking out of it. And like thinking or application is so much more complex, and it should be about the curiosity that will actually bring them to all these things in a way. So, yeah.
But at the same time, our mandate as librarians is right now to go for the framework in a way if we agree. And I believe there's like a good reason to have the framework. So somehow it's really about that development of the programs, information literacy programs. Otherwise, we're always going to stay on that level of one-shot sessions, and I'm not a big fan of that, you see. So I'm very happy to go into my class and have my students help them like right away on their assignment. But I believe they should also learn about the bigger questions, which the framework addressed. So that, for me, it's very crucial. You see, that's a bigger challenge then again for the lesson plans, because you have to develop new lesson plans according to the different frameworks.
But wait. Are we then talking about 2 different things? I am teaching according to the framework, of course, what I can do in my given time. However, I'm just not mentioning to students that I'm still structuring their plan for information literacy advancement according to the framework. So they're still getting it, just the language they get from me is not that this is what I'm doing. The structure is still exactly related to the framework. And of course, I mean, there should be a plan, annual, and on which level they should be progressing in which direction. So that's what I was mentioning, and that's what I got that Livia is also saying, right?
Yeah, my point is about that it's not restructured, you see. So I'm teaching like a one-shot session, like on the 1000 level, on the 2000 level, but in the end they look alike. So they're not going in a way higher, you see. So I'm not, and the framework is actually like the one that should go like a bit higher in thinking.
True. But that's now another matter to address with our deans, I guess, or academic affairs departments, or, you know, to propose maybe something if you have that ability or authority to do it. Because, of course, that's now another question and a problem.
Yes, it is. It is noon. I just want to say that, well, Ivana got what I was saying correctly. So that's exactly what we do the same. And just to add something about the levels, Michael, yeah, you're right in saying that the framework is also something not just basic, but also a higher level of instruction. But I think that you can use the frames also for a lower level instruction. And it's, for example, you said that you only teach scholarly conversation, which I think that it's one of the most higher level frames. So for a lower level class, I would use searching as well, strategic. I never remember how to. So the strategic part of searching rather than you're entering a bigger conversation. So I think there are different ways to look at the frames and to integrate them into your teaching. And sorry, Chris, if I went over.
This is the good stuff. Unfortunately, we have to wrap things up. I want to thank everyone for your time and contribution, and it was good to see everyone and hear everyone. Of course, we can carry this over to Connect. I know that's... go ahead, Livia. Did you have a comment?
We will share the presentation and the document that I showed in during the presentation. So it's going to be on AMICAL Connect.
And then the audio recording will soon be up once Alex gets it posted for us. So have a great summer, everyone. We do know that there's a journal club coming up. Is that right?
Yes.
Ivana? I think that's at the end of the month.
You need to understand me. I didn't see you guys for 2 years. Hello.
I know.
Hey, Ivana, wake up.
I'm just going to stop the recording here. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.